I'm Evan, 28, and my story starts where the roof ends, with stains that mapped our winters and a boy who thought peace meant catching them before they reached the floor. Before I could write my name in cursive, I could read ceilings. Pale tea-colored blooms meant a slow pipe leak you could bully with patience in a bucket. Dark amber halos meant the roof, which was less a structure and more a rumor. I grew up in a third-floor walk-up that sighed when buses passed, with a mother who was gentle in the morning and wrung out by night, and the kind of boyfriend who believed in order the way other people believe in God, loudly and mostly for the neighbors. We named the stains because it helped when we couldn't name anything else. The lake-shaped one over the table was Michigan. The blobby twins down the hall were the bear and the dog, depending on how my little brother Neat tilted his head. A long streak creeping toward the breaker box was the comet. In March storms, you could watch it lengthen by millimeters, like time-lapse grief. I kept the chore list in my pocket and the bowls in rotation. Dinner happened between drips. Homework happened when the television was quiet or when I made my voice sound like a radio announcer so Nate would believe fractions were sport. At school, I learned the edges. Soccer meant an extra hour not home. The library meant a chair that didn't wobble and adults who said my name like a door opening. Miss Patel kept granola bars in her desk and the skill to slide one across without changing the air in the room. I wanted to tell her that when you live with a ceiling you don't trust, you start sleeping with your shoes close, even in summer. Instead, I told her I liked the book. Both were true. The boyfriend taped a chore chart to the fridge with my name in the most boxes, like character could be laminated. He said roofs stop leaking when families learn discipline. He liked the sound of his own answers. The landlord liked his voicemail greeting more than our messages. Nights had temperatures. You could hear them by the way keys hit the table. One February evening, the hallway plaster swelled like soup before it tips. I slid bowls under the bulge and told Nate to stay in the bedroom. He gave me the furniture nod, the one kids learn when chaos is allergic to witnesses. The drip got brazen and the seam let go with the sound of paper tearing. Water, gray paste, a platter-sized hunk of ceiling. The lamp died. The dark felt like a person. Downstairs, someone pounded on their sky, which used to be our floor, and shouted about rain inside. I did what I knew, threw the breaker, Mr. Green had taught me, and moved anything that would remember the flood. When our door opened, it wasn't the boyfriend yet. It was the kind of knock that carries rules. 2 uniforms, a flashlight, the smell of damp paper, practical questions. Power, water, injuries. Then my mother appeared at the same door an hour later and looked at me like I'd brought the storm. That night ended in 3 pieces. The boyfriend went to his brother's to be angry where it would be applauded. My mother and Nate slept at Miss Ortiz's because she stockpiled blankets labeled for later. I got a burrowed bed in a house where the hallway photos matched their frames. A woman I didn't know told me where the cups were and meant the whole sentence. I lay awake and stared at a blank white ceiling that meant nothing. For the first time, emptiness felt like something my body didn't know how to wear. Time kept happening. Social workers asked questions that felt too big and too small at once. The boyfriend learned to polish his voice. The landlord learned to pick up when the city called. The bowls went back into cabinets. The stains dried to maps we no longer named out loud. I came back because Nate's sneakers still fit between the bed and the wall, and because leaving is not a single act, so much as a set of permissions. Eventually, I graduated, a verb that always sounds clean when the story underneath isn't, and moved through jobs and rooms with ceilings that didn't drip, but still made me look up at night, like checking a sleeping baby's breath. At 26, I found an apartment that felt like it wanted me. Light pooled late in the day against a cheap lamp I didn't immediately drop. The ceilings were eggshell, boring in the best way. I bought a ladder before I needed one because owning a way up felt like a prayer. I stacked towels like the internet told responsible people do. For weeks, I woke at 2 a.m. and walked the perimeter just to confirm that silence could have weight. 2 dominoes tipped on the same week and started this part of the story. First, the manager slipped a note under my door about a leak complaint from the neighbor below. The handwriting was neutral, the call less so. The Winder AC's drain line, ancient and proud, had decided gravity was optional during a heat wave. I shut it down, pulled the unit, wrapped the brittle line, set towels and a bowl with the precision of a person who trained for this, and apologized so efficiently, the manager started apologizing back. The neighbor just wanted sleep, which felt sane. I went to bed with the old posture in my ribs. Not dread exactly, but the stance you take when you expect the ground to negotiate. Second, an unfamiliar number left a voicemail in a careful voice that never once used the word emergency. Family services. A social worker with a name I recognized from my mother's side, because family names work like songs you didn't choose to memorize. They were looking for a short-term kinship placement for a 5-year-old. My cousin's daughter. Your name came up as stable. I stood very still in my quiet kitchen as that word circled like a helium balloon. There were conditions at the home. It might be 1 night, maybe 3. They could bring her after school with a small backpack and paperwork if I said yes. I made tea as if boiling water could stop my hands from being loud. The AC line still ticked into a bowl every few minutes despite my repairs, each drop a metronome for doubt. I called Miss Ortiz because she's the kind of neighbor who gives you blankets and the right sentence at the right time. She said a thing that landed with the simplicity of weather. You already know how to catch what falls. I said yes. Saying yes turned my apartment into a checklist I didn't know I had memorized. I texted the manager, a quick heads up about a child staying, a promise about quiet, a question about the smoke detector I'd been meaning to test. I clicked through a home safety list like a speed run. Cleaning fluids up high, outlet covers, I had none, knives into the drawer, meds into a 10. I dropped a cart into a store and came back with apples, a dinosaur toothbrush, unscented soap, and a nightlight shaped like a moon. Miss Ortiz knocked with a bag, crayons, a small blanket, a stuffed animal whose nose had been loved to cloth. I stared at my couch, calculating couch-to-bed conversions like they were math I'd always hated. The social worker arrived at 6:18 with a second, older social worker and a child whose backpack looked larger than her torso. She had careful hair and the eyes of someone specializing in exits. They said her name, Maya, and then spelled it out even though it needed no spelling. Paperwork bloomed on my table like a nervous flower. They inspected my smoke detector and ran a tap and peered at the AC line as if a drip could indict me. I signed things with a hand that wouldn't stop writing. After the door closed, the apartment looked the same and felt like a different country. I showed Maya the moon nightlight and the toothbrush like they were invitations to a safe club. She made a circuit, door, kitchen, window, door again, and then parked herself cross-legged on the rug to draw. The early warning sign of a kid building a small island. I cut an apple into quarters because I didn't know what else you feed fear, and she ate 2 without looking up. When bath time came, she stood in the doorway and asked if the water would be loud. I told her it would not, and meant it twice. I learned quickly that kids hear ceilings. The first night, she wouldn't sleep under the lamp because the shadow made a halo where halos once meant roof trouble. I moved the lamp, I turned on the moon, I put her small backpack where she could see it. She slept in a listless way that meant she didn't have to wake up to an adult she didn't know. At 2:07 a.m., I woke to phantom drips. The bowl under the AC had collected a 1/4 inch. I swapped towels and tried to be grateful for the jurisdiction of bowls. Morning arrived as a series of tasks and tests. The knock on my door at 8 was the manager with a great ponytail and the resigned competence of someone who knows buildings are theories. He replaced the drip line and suggested I keep the unit off during the day until the heat stops being a personality. I walked Maya to the bus stop, even though the case plan had her at a temporary program that drove kids to school because routines are life rafts. When we got back that afternoon, the moon nightlight was still where we left it. That felt like a small promise capped.
I want to tell you I got good at this fast. I didn't. I forgot how small kids are until they have a big reaction to something that looks like nothing. The microwave beep made Maya flinch the first time. She didn't like closed doors, and I learned to narrate my exits. Bathroom, 2 minutes, door half open. On day 3, she tried to throw up quietly beside the toilet so it wouldn't be a mess, and the way her small back hunched over was a sentence I'd been carrying since I was Nate's size. I bought ginger tea, I learned gentle jokes. I felt ridiculous making a sticker chart for bedtime when the kids' family life needed a parliament, and still, I made the chart because humans like seeing wins. The adults arrived in their roles. The caseworker with the careful words, the court with its calendar that makes children wait, my mother with the text that said proud without punctuation, the boyfriend with silence, which is its own noise. Nate came over with a chocolate milk and an expression I recognized from the mirror at 16. He pointed at the ceiling as if to ask, and then didn't, because how are your ceilings is our version of how are you. Then the weather remembered us. A low, mean rain set in on a Thursday and committed. By evening, the building hummed with that saturated sound. Pipes talking to each other behind walls, windows negotiating, the air a little too close to itself. At 9:33, a darker halo bloomed above the corner of my living room, a color I hadn't seen in years in rooms I called mine. It started as a whisper and then found confidence. The first drop hit the bookshelf like a coin. The moon nightlight looked suddenly like a lifeboat in a museum. I knew exactly what to do and felt my body ignore me. I did the breaker routine by muscle memory, the bucket ballet I could perform in my sleep, the towel rotation, the phone call to the manager. I narrated to Maya in that calm tone adults use that aims to be believable, and hopes. She watched me with that specialist exit stare. The second drop came faster, then the third, and surprise tightened into fury because I had promised this kid we had different rules now. Two things shifted the room. First, the downstairs neighbor, the leak complaint one, knocked not to complain, but with a drop cloth and blue painter's tape and the most beautiful sentence in adult fluency, "I've done this before." He and I taped a plastic skirt over the bloom to spread the water, staged towels like we were setting a table, and used a broom handle to coax the bulge into dripping where the bucket lived. It looked like ridiculous theater and worked like experience. Second, Maya walked over in her socks and held out the moon nightlight, unplugged. "For the drip," she said, as if the light could convince the ceiling to behave. I set it near the bucket and told her it would make the water fall softly. She nodded as if physics were susceptible to suggestion. Maintenance arrived with headlamps and resigned jokes about the roof. They poked, patched, tacked, made calls. The rain kept insisting, but slower now, obedient enough to plan around. The caseworker called when I texted her the situation, flooding is a word you use carefully, and asked if she needed to move Maya for the night. The idea of packing a small backpack at 10 p.m. in a storm to go to a stranger's ceiling felt like asking thunder to tuck her in. I said we were safe. She believed me because the manager believed me, and because sometimes steadiness is a reputation that arrives before you do. By midnight, the bucket had a shallow pond, and the plastic skirt breathed like a quiet lung. We built a fort under the dry corner out of 2 chairs and a bedsheet and called it the tent. I told a story about a comet that learned to be a ceiling again. Maya fell asleep with the moon nightlight glowing against the sheet, her hand on my forearm like she was making sure I didn't evaporate. I lay there awake and counted drips that weren't hitting the floor. Morning had the gray smell of damp plaster and cheap coffee. The manager, to his credit, showed up with a roofing guy who looked at the sky like he'd lost an argument with it. He promised work that sounded real. He meant it. Sometimes meaning it is the whole miracle.
There was a hearing the next week, the kind of room where you sit up straight because you want the geometry to like you. Maya's mother didn't come. My cousin did and looked like a person the storm had been living in for months. The guardian ad litem asked questions that were not unkind and absolutely unforgiving. I answered as if my ceiling were the jury. We left with a piece of paper that said temporary and a date to check again. Law's way of trying to be humane. The house learned new sounds. Tiny shoes at the door, the hiss of a pan that means someone will beg for more eggs, the quiet of a child breathing like a metronome you trust. I painted over the stain after the roof repair and missed it. Then Maya put glow-in-the-dark stars up where the halo had been, like a map of places we could aim for when the lights go out. The downstairs neighbor came up with a plant that doesn't mind low light and said, "For the tent," and I accepted gifts like a person allowed to be part of a building. My mother texted, halting since the winter when she'd looked at me like I'd conjured the flood. She asked if I needed anything and then corrected herself for the child. The boyfriend stayed absent in that way that makes you think absence is a skill. Nate sent a photo of his ceiling at his new place. White, boring, and I replied with a thumbs up that meant more than any sentence I could afford. Weeks passed, and the hearing date moved toward us with the slow certitude of government. There was another inspection. The woman with the clipboard admired the moon nightlight and the lineup of towels under the sink like I'd arranged a parade. She asked if I understood what longer meant. I did not really, and also I did in the way you do when a small person's backpack starts to look less like luggage and more like furniture. I said yes in the form you sign when your handwriting betrays your heart rate. I thought the story's resolution might be loud, a gavel, an apology, a dramatic last-minute phone call. It wasn't. It arrived on a Tuesday afternoon smelling like marker caps and apples. The caseworker came by with a smaller stack of papers than usual. She sat at my table, the same surface where a ceiling once auditioned for gravity, and used a sentence that landed so gently, I didn't feel it until it was over. We're extending the placement here for the foreseeable future. Maya, who had been drawing a purple dog with stars for eyes, looked up because adults had made a sound worth checking. She didn't ask for definitions. She put the dog on the fridge with a magnet shaped like a lemon. When bedtime came, she didn't ask if the water would be loud. She asked if we could leave the moon on. We did. There are endings that make movies jealous, and there are endings that feel like correct breathing. This one was the second kind. The roof was patched, the stain was painted, the stars were still where she had stuck them, and when the rain returned a week later, the house hummed without inventing its own weather. I tucked towels away because I had learned to trust the ceiling without forgetting its history. That's as close to peace as I know how to get. People like to ask how I knew I could say yes. I didn't. I only knew the language of ceilings and the posture of buckets and the way a building holds if enough hands touch it. I knew the feel of a night when the drip stops, and you listen anyway. I knew from being the older kid that steadiness is not a gift you find, it's a repetition you practice. A bowl you set, a breaker you throw, a fort you build with 2 chairs and a sheet, a moon you plug in because sometimes light is persuasion. If you came over tonight, you'd see nothing special. Shoes by the door, a ladder with paint freckles, a plant trying hard in bad light, a small backpack that doesn't move much anymore. And when you look up, because I always do, you'd see a ceiling that is only a ceiling, except for a scatter of glow stars where an old bruise once lived and a handprint you'd miss unless someone told you it's there, pressed faintly in the paint near the corner. Maya left it before the paint dried, a mark the size of a promise. I'm Evan, 28, and I still map weather by stains. The difference now is I'm not listening alone.